I can still smell the cedar smoke mixed with burning paper when I close my eyes. 23 years have passed since the fire at the Cascade Research Station, and I've never spoken publicly about what we lost that night. Not just the data, not just the facility, but the window into something that shouldn't have existed according to every textbook I'd ever read. My name is Dr. Nathan Voss. I was 34 when it happened, a behavioral ecologist specializing in great ape cognition, working out of a remote field station in the North Cascades of Washington State. The year was 2001. Cell phones barely worked up there. The internet was dial-up when the weather cooperated. We were isolated by choice, studying black bear communication patterns in old-growth forest. Then, on a February morning so cold the trees cracked like rifle shots, everything changed. A logger named Dennis Cole radioed our station about something trapped in a ravine off Forest Road 23. Something big, something injured, something that looked almost human. I loaded the medical kit into my truck, expecting a bear or maybe an elk. I didn't expect to meet a creature that would consume 8 months of my life and then vanish into smoke and ash, leaving me with nothing but memories that no one would ever believe. The Cascade Research Station sat at 3,200 feet, accessible only by logging roads that became impassable from November through March. Our team consisted of 5 researchers, 2 graduate students, and a rotating cast of volunteers who could tolerate the isolation. We lived in converted Forest Service cabins heated by wood stoves, running our equipment off solar panels and a diesel generator that coughed to life every morning like an asthmatic old man. My daily routine was methodical. Wake at dawn, check the remote camera traps, document bear activity patterns, analyze vocalizations we'd recorded overnight. The work was slow, precise, and deeply satisfying in its quietness. We were studying how black bears communicated about food sources across territorial boundaries. Mundane to most people, fascinating to us. The forest was our laboratory, and we'd learned to read it like a text. The North Cascades in winter are a study in silence and endurance. Douglas fir and western red cedar tower overhead, their branches heavy with snow that falls in sudden, muffled collapses. Mountain hemlock clings to impossible slopes. The understory is thick with salal and Oregon grape, and when the fog rolls in, which it does most days, the world contracts to about 30 feet of visibility in any direction. You learn to navigate by sound, the rush of snowmelt streams, the warning calls of Steller's jays, the particular crack of a branch under weight. We knew the area supported cougar, black bear, Roosevelt elk, and the occasional gray wolf dispersing from reintroduced populations to the north. We documented all of them. We knew their tracks, their scat, their behavioral signatures. So when Dennis Cole described what he'd seen, like a gorilla, doc, but bigger, and the face was wrong, and Jesus Christ, it looked at me, I assumed trauma, hypothermia, or maybe a black bear standing upright combined with poor visibility. I drove out with my research assistant, Maya Reeves, a graduate student from UC Davis with a gift for remaining calm in field emergencies. We brought medical supplies, tranquilizer equipment rated for large mammals, and a healthy dose of skepticism. The ravine was accessible only by foot, a half-mile bushwhack through snow that came up to our knees. Dennis let us in, visibly shaken, speaking in fragments. Fell through ice on the creek up there, tried to climb out. Legs wrong. It's still down there, Doc. It hasn't moved much. We heard it before we saw it. A low, resonant vocalization, something between a groan and a hum, with a frequency that seemed to vibrate in your chest cavity. The sound had structure. It wasn't random. It had the quality of language, though not one I recognized. Then the smell hit us. Musky, organic, sharp with stress hormones. But underneath that, something else. Something that reminded me of the great ape house at the zoo. That particular smell of an intelligent primate in close quarters. Maya grabbed my arm. Nathan. It was lying on its side on a flat rock about 15 feet down. One leg bent at an angle that made my stomach turn. The creature was massive. I'd estimate 7.5 feet long, maybe 600 pounds, covered in dark brown hair that was lighter on the chest and palms. The face was flat, with a pronounced brow ridge, a wide nose, and lips that were moving slightly as it vocalized. It turned its head when it heard us. The eyes were dark brown, deeply set, and when they locked onto mine, I felt the same jolt of recognition I'd felt the first time I'd made eye contact with a bonobo in graduate school. This was someone, not something, and it was dying. We spent 40 minutes just observing before making any moves. Maya documented everything with the camcorder while I made notes in my field book, hands shaking, from cold, from adrenaline, from the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. The femur was fractured, compound with visible bone. The creature had lost blood, though not as much as I would have expected given the injury. It was in shock, respiration shallow but aware. Every few minutes it would make that low vocalization, and twice it reached toward the creek with one long arm, scooping snow toward its mouth. "It's thirsty," Maya whispered, "and it's trying to communicate." I called back to the station on the satellite phone, spoke to Dr. Ellen Reimer, our principal investigator, a woman whose 30 years in field biology had given her an almost supernatural calm. I described what we were seeing, knowing how it sounded. Her response: "Document everything. Keep your distance. I'm calling Fish and Wildlife in the university. Do not approach until we have a plan." But plans take time, and we had an injured animal, no, an injured being, suffering in front of us. I made a choice that would define the next 8 months. "I'm going down there with the medical kit," I told Maya. "If it reacts aggressively, hit it with the tranquilizer. 250 milligrams of Telazol, adjusted for estimated body mass." Maya's hand was steady on the dart rifle. "Be careful, Nathan. We have no idea what we're dealing with." I descended slowly, talking in a low, calm voice the way you would with any frightened animal. The creature watched me but didn't vocalize. Its breathing quickened. When I was about 10 feet away, it did something that stopped me cold. It held up one hand, palm out, the universal gesture for stop. I stopped. We looked at each other across 3 million years of evolutionary divergence, and something passed between us. Not quite understanding, but acknowledgement. It lowered its hand slowly and turned its head away, exposing the injured leg. Permission. I spent the next 2 hours providing what emergency care I could. Cleaned the wound with antiseptic, applied compression bandages, set up an IV drip with saline and antibiotics, praying the dosage calculations I was making on the fly were close enough. The creature remained still throughout, occasionally making soft sounds that might have been pain, might have been communication. By the time the Fish and Wildlife helicopter arrived 3 hours later with a specialized wildlife veterinarian, we'd stabilized the patient enough for transport. Dr. Sarah Chen, the vet, spent exactly 4 seconds looking at the creature before turning to me with an expression I'll never forget. "What the actual fuck is that, Nathan?" "I don't know," I said, "but it's alive, it's intelligent, and it needs help." The decision was made quickly and quietly at a level above all of our pay grades. The creature would be transported to the Cascade Research Station, which was remote, secure, and already set up for animal observation. A team of specialists would be assembled. This would be treated as a classified research project until we understood what we were dealing with. No press, no publicity, no leaks. We would study it, document it, and when we had enough data, we would publish findings that would rewrite our understanding of human evolution and biodiversity in North America. We would change the world. We just had to keep it alive, and keep it secret. The creature, we started calling him Subject 1 in the official logs, though Maya privately named him Atlas, after the way he'd carried that injury with such silent endurance, was housed in the largest of our observation facilities, a modified pole barn we'd used for equipment storage. We cleared it out in 2 days, installed veterinary equipment borrowed from the university's wildlife hospital, set up infrared cameras and audio monitoring, and created what amounted to a hybrid ICU and observation chamber. Dr. Chen stayed on site for the first 3 weeks managing the medical crisis. The femur had been set, but infection was the real threat. We were essentially guessing at dosages, using chimpanzee and human data as rough guidelines, adjusting based on response. Atlas was sedated for the first 72 hours while his body began the work of healing. I was there when he first woke fully conscious in our care. It was 4 in the morning, late February, with new snow falling silently outside. I was alone in the observation room reviewing audio recordings from the previous day when I heard movement in the recovery area. Atlas was sitting upright on the padded platform we'd built for him. The infrared cameras showed his body in shades of green and white, heat signature blazing. He was looking directly at the camera in the corner, had clearly identified it as a lens, as a point of observation. Then he looked at me through the observation window. We'd thought it was one-way glass, but even in the darkness, his eyes found mine exactly. I stood frozen, clipboard in hand, as he made a series of gestures, pointed at himself, then at the bandaged leg, then at me, then touched 2 fingers to his chest over his heart. "Thank you. I'm not anthropomorphizing. I'm telling you what I saw. Deliberate communication, symbolic thinking, gratitude. I pressed my hand against the glass. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with the same intensity I was studying him. Then he made a sound, not the low groan we'd heard before, but something more complex. A series of vocalizations with clear phonemic structure, patterns of consonants and vowels, rhythm, intonation, language. I grabbed the recording equipment and spent the next 6 hours documenting everything as Atlas moved carefully around the space, testing his injured leg, examining every aspect of his enclosure with methodical intelligence. He understood doors. He understood windows. He understood that he was being observed and seemed to accept it with a kind of resigned patience. By dawn, I had filled 40 pages of notes and captured 3 hours of video. When Dr. Reimer arrived at 7, I played her the recordings. She watched in silence, her face unreadable. When the footage ended, she removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "Nathan, do you understand what this means? It means we've found a living hominid species that was supposed to be extinct or mythical. It means we've found a being with clear indicators of sapience, theory of mind, symbolic communication, cultural knowledge." She looked at me hard. "This isn't an animal subject, this is a person, and we're keeping him in a barn." The ethical weight of that statement settled over us like the snow settling on the cedars outside. "What do we do?" I asked. "We document everything. We learn everything we can. And then we figure out how to protect his people. Because if there's one, there are more." She paused. "And we pray the wrong people don't find out before we're ready." That prayer would not be answered. The research began in earnest. Our team expanded carefully. A linguistic anthropologist from the University of British Columbia, a primate behaviorist from Emory, a geneticist from Johns Hopkins, who arrived with portable sequencing equipment that he set up in what used to be our supply closet. Everyone who came signed NDAs backed by federal authority. We were told that the project fell under endangered species protection protocols, though which agency was actually in charge remained deliberately vague. I became Atlas's primary contact. Not by design, it just happened. He seemed to tolerate my presence more readily than others, and over weeks we developed something like a routine. I would enter his space twice daily to check his medical status, bring food. We learned he was omnivorous with preferences for salmon, berries, and roots, and conduct behavioral observations. We started with basics, cognitive tests adapted from great ape research, object permanence, tool use, numerical cognition, social referencing. Atlas passed everything we gave him with what I can only describe as patient bemusement, like a professor sitting through an undergraduate exam. Then we moved to communication. Dr. Rebecca Park, our linguistic anthropologist, spent weeks analyzing his vocalizations. She identified at least 47 distinct phonemes, structured grammar, and what appeared to be dialectical variations in his speech, suggesting he'd learned language in a social context from others. "This isn't just proto-language," Rebecca told us during a March meeting, her excitement barely contained. "This is a fully developed linguistic system. He's been trying to talk to us and we've been too stupid to listen. We started teaching him American Sign Language, using the same protocols that had been successful with Coco and Washoe. Atlas picked it up in 3 days. The first time he signed back to me, the sign for outside, followed by tree, followed by home. I had to leave the room. He wanted to go home. He missed the forest. He was trapped here because of us, because we'd saved him, and now we were keeping him in a barn so we could study him. The ethical crisis became impossible to ignore. Dr. Reimer called a team meeting in late March. "We need to discuss next steps," she said. "Atlas is healing. The femur is setting well. He could potentially be released back to the wild within 2 months. We can't release him until we've published," the geneticist argued. "The DNA analysis alone is going to take another 6 weeks. This is the most important biological discovery in a century. We need peer review. We need confirmation. We need to treat him like a person, not a specimen," I interrupted. "He's told us he wants to leave. We're holding him against his will." "For his own protection," Dr. Chen countered. "The moment this goes public, these forests will be overrun with hunters, cryptozoologists, media. His entire species would be at risk. So we keep him prisoner indefinitely for his own good?" Maya's voice was sharp. "Listen to what we're saying." The argument went in circles. Scientific duty versus ethical obligation. The value of knowledge versus the rights of a sentient being. The protection of a species versus the freedom of an individual. We were ethicists playing at science, or scientists playing at ethics. Either way, we were out of our depth. Atlas watched us through the observation window during these debates. I wonder now if he understood more than we thought. If he saw us struggling with questions his people might have resolved millennia ago, I wonder if he pitied us. It was late April when Atlas showed us the drawings. We'd provided him with paper and charcoal pencils. Basic enrichment to combat the boredom of captivity. Most of the research team expected simple mark-making, maybe some basic shapes, the level of artistic expression you might see in captive orangutans. Instead, Atlas produced landscapes, detailed, proportional, representational landscapes of specific places, a valley with a distinctive rock formation, a river bend with a particular arrangement of fallen logs, a grove of old-growth cedars with a clearing in the center. He drew for hours, filling page after page, and then he did something that changed everything. He arranged the drawings in sequence and pointed to them in order while signing, home, family, here, a map. He'd drawn us a map to his group's territory. Then he drew figures, tall bipedal figures in various sizes. He pointed to the smallest ones and made a cradling gesture. Children. He pointed to the medium ones and signed, brother. He pointed to the largest and touched his chest, then made the sign for father. Rebecca recorded everything, tears running down her face. He's telling us about his family, his community. They're looking for him. Atlas drew one more image, the ravine where we'd found him. He pointed to it, then made a tumbling gesture with his hands, then pointed to his leg. He'd been traveling through unfamiliar territory, had fallen through ice in the dark, had gotten lost trying to find his way home. He wasn't some solitary cryptid wandering the wilderness. He was someone's son, someone's brother. He had people who were missing him, probably searching for him, possibly mourning him. I left the observation room and walked out into the April rain. The forest smelled like cedar and wet earth and new growth. Somewhere out there, in territories we hadn't mapped, maybe couldn't map, there were others like Atlas living their lives in careful silence, hiding from us because we'd given them every reason to hide. And we'd kept one of their own in a barn for 3 months so we could study him. When I came back inside, Dr. Reimer was sitting alone in the common room, Atlas's drawings spread across the table. We have to let him go, I said. I know. No publication, no data release. We document everything for our own records, we seal it, and we walk away. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts relief and grief. The scientific community will never know. Everything we've learned, cognitive evolution, linguistic capability, behavioral ecology, all of it stays silent. Maybe that's how it should be. I picked up one of the drawings, a detailed study of a hand, Atlas's hand, rendered in charcoal with careful attention to the creases in the palm, the texture of the hair on the knuckles. Maybe some knowledge isn't meant to be published. Maybe the ethical choice is to know something miraculous exists and then protect it by staying quiet. The university will fight us, the funding agencies, everyone who's invested in this project. Then we don't tell them until it's done. I looked at her. We release him before they can stop us, before someone decides that research value outweighs his freedom, before this becomes a circus. Dr. Reimer was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. We'll need to do it carefully, track his recovery, make sure he can navigate home, maybe provide some way to monitor his well-being without intrusion. We can do that. We spent the next 3 weeks preparing for something that felt both like a prison break and an act of mercy. The first sign of trouble came in early May, when a Forest Service ranger mentioned to Dr. Chen that he'd been asked questions about our research station by someone claiming to be from a documentary production company. The second sign came 3 days later when we found fresh tire tracks on the access road that hadn't come from our vehicles. Someone was interested in us. Someone was watching. Dr. Reimer made calls to her contacts at the university. The response was unsettling. There had been inquiries, formal requests for information about Project Cascade, from sources that wouldn't identify themselves properly, pressure from somewhere up the administrative chain to provide progress reports, facility access, preliminary data. They know, she told us during an emergency evening meeting. I don't know how, but someone knows what we have here. The geneticist, Dr. Paul Hendricks, shifted uncomfortably. I may have sent preliminary sequence data to a colleague for consultation. Anonymized, no context, just the raw genetic information. Jesus, Paul, Maya said. It was necessary for verification. I needed independent confirmation that the sequences weren't contaminated, but I didn't. I would never. It doesn't matter now, I interrupted. What matters is that we're running out of time. If outside parties are circling, we need to move up our timeline. That night, I sat with Atlas in his enclosure for what would be one of our last sessions. He'd been increasingly restless, pacing despite the still healing leg, spending hours at the window looking toward the mountains. The spring weather was calling to him. The snow was melting in the high country, opening up the territories he'd drawn for us. I showed him a map, a real topographic map of the North Cascades. He studied it with clear comprehension, his finger tracing elevation lines following waterways. Then he pointed to a location about 40 miles northeast of our station, a remote drainage basin in the most inaccessible part of the park. Home. Can you get there? I signed. Leg okay for travel? He stood, put weight on the injured leg, walked in a careful circle. Then he signed. Yes. Go soon. 1 week. I signed back. We take you close. Then you go home. Safe. He looked at me for a long time. Then he signed something we hadn't taught him. Something he'd apparently constructed himself from the signs he knew. Friend. Thank you. Remember. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The situation deteriorated faster than we anticipated. 2 days before our planned release, a convoy of vehicles arrived at the station unannounced. Representatives from Fish and Wildlife, from the university's legal department, from an agency whose acronym I didn't recognize but whose authority everyone seemed to defer to immediately. They had documents, transfer orders, legal authority to take custody of biological specimen K001 for national security evaluation and classification review. You're not taking him, I said, standing between them and the observation facility. The lead agent, a man in his 50s with the calm demeanor of someone used to compliance, looked at me with something like pity. Dr. Voss, this is beyond your authority now. This discovery has implications for evolutionary biology, conservation policy, and national resource management. It requires comprehensive governmental review. He's not a resource. He's a person. That determination hasn't been legally established. He gestured to his team. Please step aside. Dr. Reimer put a hand on my shoulder. Nathan, don't make this worse. But it was already worse, because Atlas had been watching through the window. He'd seen the vehicles, the uniformed personnel, the tension in our body language, and he'd understood that everything had changed. What happened next wasn't violent, but it was the closest I've come to witnessing a kind of conscious, dignified resistance. The federal team approached the observation facility with veterinary sedation equipment, prepared to tranquilize Atlas for transport. Dr. Chen had been compelled to provide dosage recommendations. The plan was simple: sedate, secure, transport to an undisclosed facility for comprehensive evaluation. But when they entered the enclosure, Atlas was ready. He hadn't tried to escape. He couldn't with the healing leg and the secured facility. Instead, he'd done something more profound. He'd arranged everything we'd given him over the months, the drawings, the learning materials, the tools, into a careful display in the center of the room, a gallery, an exhibition of evidence, and he sat in the middle of it, cross-legged, hands resting on his knees in a posture of meditation or perhaps protest, peaceful resistance. The lead agent stopped at the doorway. Even he seemed taken aback by the obvious intentionality of the scene. Atlas looked at each person in the doorway, then reached forward and picked up one of his drawings, a family portrait, the figures he'd identified as mother, father, siblings, himself. He held it up so everyone could see. Then he pointed to himself and signed, slowly and clearly, "Home, family, please." One of the junior agents lowered his tranquilizer rifle. "Sir, I don't think—" "We have our orders," the lead agent said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. I stepped forward. "You understand what you're looking at, right? You understand that you're about to kidnap a sentient being away from his family, imprison him indefinitely, subject him to research without consent. You understand that this is exactly what we did to indigenous people 100 years ago, and we called it science then too. This is not a human being, Dr. Voss. Are you sure? Because he's demonstrating theory of mind, linguistic capability, artistic expression, family bonds, and moral reasoning. He's doing everything we use to define personhood. So what's the actual difference? DNA? How many chromosomes does someone need to have rights?" The standoff lasted maybe 45 seconds, but felt like hours. Atlas remained motionless, the drawing held up like a banner, his eyes moving from face to face. Then the fire alarm went off. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Strobe lights activated. The sprinkler system engaged. In the confusion, I saw Maya at the alarm panel, her hand still on the manual activation switch. "Fire!" she shouted. "Everyone out! Now!" In the chaos of evacuation, federal agents scrambling, equipment dropped, protocols overridden by immediate safety concerns, Dr. Reimer grabbed my arm. "The back door!" she hissed. "I unlocked it 10 minutes ago. He can get to the tree line in 90 seconds if he moves now." I looked at her. "Ellen, I'm 63 years old. I've published everything I needed to publish. My career can survive this. Yours might not, so don't argue with me. Get him out." I ran back into the chaos. Found Atlas standing now, confused by the alarm, the water, the commotion. I grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the rear exit, signing frantically, "Go, now, run, home." He understood immediately, moved faster than I'd thought possible with the injured leg, through the door, across the open ground, into the forest. I watched him disappear into the cedar and hemlock, a shadow among shadows, until I couldn't distinguish him from the trees anymore. Behind me, the real fire started, small at first, electrical, spreading fast through the old wooden structure. By the time anyone realized what had happened, it was far too late to stop it. The Cascade Research Station burned for 4 hours. The pole barn where we'd housed Atlas went first, then spread to the main facility where we'd stored all our data. Computers, hard drives, notebooks, samples, everything. The federal team spent those hours trying to establish a perimeter, searching for a 7-foot hominid in hundreds of square miles of wilderness, calling for backup that would take hours to arrive in that remote location. They never found him. By the time additional resources arrived at dawn, Atlas had a 12-hour head start and 40 miles of nearly impassable terrain to disappear into. The spring snowmelt had already erased any tracks. The investigation into the fire was exhaustive. Electrical malfunction was the official conclusion, exacerbated by old wiring, wooden construction, and the general hazards of remote research facilities. That Maya had triggered the fire alarm just before the fire started was ruled coincidental. That Dr. Reimer had been near the main building when it ignited was never fully explained, but couldn't be proven otherwise. My career didn't survive. Not really. I resigned from the university before they could terminate me. Dr. Chen went back to her veterinary practice. Maya finished her dissertation at a different institution under a different advisor. Rebecca published a paper on theoretical linguistic frameworks in non-human species that carefully avoided any mention of actual data. The geneticist's samples were destroyed in the fire. Without them, he had nothing to report. We scattered. We stayed quiet. We kept the secret. The federal agents tried to pursue it for 6 months, searching for physical evidence, interviewing everyone involved, attempting to reconstruct our research from fragments, but without samples, without photographic evidence, without corroborating data. All they had were our testimonies, which varied in details, contradicted each other strategically, and ultimately amounted to nothing prosecutable. The incident was classified, filed away, forgotten by everyone except those of us who lived it. I moved to Oregon, took a teaching position at a small college, stopped doing field research. Every few months, Dr. Reimer sends me an email with no subject line and no text, just a blank message. Her way of saying she's still keeping the faith. Maya sends postcards from wherever her current research takes her, always with the same message. Some things are worth protecting. And late at night, when I'm grading papers or prepping lectures on behavioral ecology, I think about Atlas. I wonder if he made it home, if his family found him, if they're still out there in the high country, living their lives in careful silence, teaching their children to avoid the sounds of human voices, human vehicles, human intrusion. I wonder if he tells them stories about the strange months he spent in captivity. If those stories serve as warnings or as evidence of something more complicated, proof that not all humans are threats, that some of us tried, however imperfectly, to do the right thing. Last year, a hiker reported finding a strange arrangement of rocks near the boundary of Olympic National Park, large stones placed in a deliberate circle around a clearing, with what looked like a carved symbol in the center. The image made it onto a cryptozoology blog, a crude but unmistakable representation of a hand pressed to glass. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Could have been anything. Could have been coincidence. Could have been kids messing around in the woods. Or it could have been a message from someone who remembered, who wanted one person to know he made it home. There are still places where the world resists in complete silence, where knowledge exists without publication, where some truths remain protected not through ignorance but through conscious choice, where the scientific method bends to accommodate something more fundamental, the understanding that not every mystery needs to be solved, not every discovery needs to be announced. And maybe the real miracle is in the restraint, choosing to let some things remain unknown, some beings remain hidden, some stories remain unfinished.